kneel for the wedding prayer. Okay, let us pray. Dear God, thank you so much for your love. Thank you so much for the opportunity that you give to us to be able to study together. Thank you also for the gift of technology, that we can be able to meet with fellow friends that we share the same faith with. We've become a family, Lord, to all of us from all around the world. And we ask you, God, that you be with us now as we're going to have this study. May your Holy Spirit open our minds and our hearts that we may be able to learn from what you have to give us today, and also know, dear God, what problem we have as human beings and the work that we have upon our shoulders that we need to be able to do. We ask and pray all this in Jesus' name. Amen. So I hope people are able to see my board clearly. If not, I hope we will be able to work with what I have. And just to confirm if people can hear me clearly and see my board clearly. Someone to confirm.
Yes, it's good.
Okay, thank you. So basically, we all understand as members of the movement that we are basically at the verge of the Sunday law. And we just want to consider that subject in connection with the movements for the Sunday law, right? So where we're going to begin is right where the Midnight Prayer message began, X27. So we'll consider the structure of X27, and we want to look at, take out some points that are important for us to understand what we're going to be learning in this presentation. So as we consider the structure of X27, it speaks of the journey, right? The journey of two institutions. And I didn't mention if people can participate, it's okay. If people want to participate, I'll see if I'll be able to ask questions, or I'll ask questions and I won't pick anyone. I would rather people answer voluntarily. It makes it better. So if you have something to say, you can go ahead and unmute and speak. If you have a question, you can also speak as we go. So like we said, we're considering the structure of X27, and we want to see the journey of these two institutions, because this is what X27 is all about, right? Maybe just as a way of asking a question to all of us. X27, what are these two institutions that we're talking about?
The United States and the SDA Church.
Yes, so we have the United States and the SDA Church represented by the ships, right? We have two ships, and these two ships, we have the first one that basically tells us a story of how these two institutions abide in death, right? They basically choose to abide in death, right? And that ship is the first in which Paul enters into, which is the ship of Adramitium, right? And then we have the second ship that Paul enters into again as he continues with his journey, which is the ship of Alexandria, right? And Alexandria basically tells us that these two institutions, the SDA Church and the United States of America, are the defender of humankind, right? So this is what we see. And then maybe if I can ask a question as well. So we spoke about these two institutions, right? The SDA Church and the USA being represented by the sheeps, right? And where do we fit in as the movement? Where is our story in the story of X27? How do you fit into the story? Someone?
Those who got off the ship.
Sorry?
Sorry, my voice is not that good. Those who got off the ship.
Those who got off the ship. What do you mean by those who got off the ship? How do they represent the movement? Who are they? Okay, anyone else can give us the answer. So we have the SDA Church and we have the, yes, go ahead.
I'm not sure if I'm right, but what is it? Paul, Luke, and Aristarchus? Are they representatives of the movement?
Okay, so we have the institutions being represented by the vessel, which is the ship, right? And then the story of the movement, how it comes in, is through Paul, right? Luke, Aristarchus are those that are helping Paul in the journey. Remember, we spoke about how, I'm not sure which one is which. Aristarchus, I think, is the Holy Spirit, if I'm not mistaken. But basically, we see Paul as the one who is representing the movement, right? And Paul is in the ship, right? So what we want to consider, or what we want to look at, is the story of these two ships, right? And what's interesting about it is that these two ships, or rather these two institutions, yes, the two institutions are said to be the defender of humankind. And the journey that we have when we consider the ship of Alexandria as it is representing these two institutions, which are the SDA and the USA. Maybe I'll just put it by the corner here. So we have the USA and we have the SDA Church. And these two, we have a story that is told about these two institutions being represented by the ship of Alexandria, right? So this is a journey that this ship is taking, right? And in this journey, we see how this ship, or these two institutions rather, these two institutions are basically failing to do their work, right? Like we identified, this is the defender of mankind or humankind. So with the USA, this is, if I can say, the external events, right? The things that are happening externally, right? In a nation, right? And then we have the SDA Church being the internal, right? Or they're basically doing the same work. The USA doing the work externally, and then the SDA Church doing the work internally with a group of people, religious people, right? So what we have, these different waymarks are representing a journey. And where is this journey taking us to? At the end of that journey, what happens to the ship?
Shipwreck.
Shipwreck.
Yes. So basically the ship gets to a point where it's shipwrecked. I hope people will be able to see what I'm writing. So at the end of that journey, we have shipwreck of the ship. So basically, if we have shipwreck of this ship, it means that these two institutions have failed to do their work, right? Because once you have the ship destroyed, it is not able to do the work that it was supposed to do, right? And then in the journey of this ship, where do we begin? I'm not talking about the waymarks of the years. I'm talking about what we have in Acts 27. Where does the journey begin? Okay, it begins in Alexandria, right? Alexandria, and this is Alexandria, basically in Egypt, right? Okay, my board is too small. I think I'm going to write it in short form. I'll just write Alex. And then from there, we have the ship going to a place. This is where Paul gets into the ship at the place called Myra of Lycia, right? And then afterwards, the ship gets to a point where it's, I guess we can say, a turning point, right? Where the ship loses direction or it goes off course, right? It was going in a certain direction and then it gets to a point where it can't go in that particular direction. So it goes off course at the place called Cnidus. And then from there, the ship gets to Lasea, right? And by this time, the ship has already changed direction. If I can represent it that way. It has changed direction, so it gets to Lasea, and then eventually it gets to a point where by this time where the ship gets to this place, there's, I don't know, I don't remember if it's a place, but I think it's connected with winds, Euroclydon, right? At this point, by the time the ship gets here, it's certain that that ship is actually going to basically shipwreck, right? So this is also another turning point that we have in the journey of this ship. When you get here, the fate of the ship is inevitable. And this is where we see that by the time it gets here and what happens there, the ship is going for shipwreck. So I hope we are still together on that. So as we consider this now, this is the story, as we said, of the journey that the USA and the SDA Church go through. So now we want to identify the waymarks, the corresponding waymarks to this journey of the ship. So this is 1979. Let me know if the marker is okay, if you can see it, or if I should change it. No, not 1979, sorry. 1798. 1798, and then from there we have October 22, 1844, right? And then from there we have 1863. We know this as also a major turning point in the history of the USA and the SDA Church, right? Where both the institutions, they go off course. The direction in which they're supposed to go to, they basically change that direction. And then you have 1989, and then we have 9/11, 2001, and then eventually shipwreck is at the Sunday law, right? So what the story of Acts 27 is telling us is that okay, we have these two institutions, they have a job that they need to do, they have a job that is cut out for them. But the problem that we see is that they then eventually get to a point where they do not do their job. If anything, they're on the right side of what they're supposed to be achieving. And we are told how that actually happens. So what we want to do, as we are given this structure, right, and the story of X27, we want to consider more about how this actually happened, because our focus is to understand this point, shipwreck, right? So we want to understand how this shipwreck eventually happens, right? So I hope we are together on that. Okay, so what we see also as we are being told by the story of X27, like we said, we're identifying the story of the Sunday law, the coming of the Sunday law, but we understand that this coming of the Sunday law doesn't happen in a vacuum, right? It's progressive. We're being told by X27, but we also want to consider more information about how that actually happens, right? So we understand there is movements for the Sunday law that have been making strides for some time now, right? And we want to consider a story of Protestantism, right? And the history of Protestantism. We know that Protestantism plays a major role in the movements for the Sunday law, right? And we understand that they basically make up the image of the beast, right? And they basically aids in the resurrection of who? Of the papacy, of the things that have happened in the past. And we want to consider how that actually happens within Protestantism. So just to confirm if we are together on that. Someone?
I'm with you on it. I don't know about everybody else.
Okay.
I am too.
Thank you. Okay, thank you. So now we see that we have three distinct histories that show us a pattern worth considering, which is basically three distinct histories, right, in the history of Protestantism. So when we consider that, we also understand that we have this pattern that we have these structures that we are given, right? And within the theme of Adventism, the papacy, as well as Protestantism. And with Adventism, we know we consider also the story of modern Israel, or the structure of modern Israel, right? And then with the papacy, we have the structure of the counterfeit. With Protestantism, we have the structure of in God we trust. That's how we will name it. So there is something that is, when you consider these three, I don't know if I can call them institutions, okay, themes, the theme of Adventism, the papacy, and Protestantism. And with these three structures, there's something that we see with them, right? With all three, they have three distinct histories, right? With modern Israel, we have three distinct histories. If someone can name the three distinct histories for me within modern Israel, that is not Jonathan. Someone else.
Are you taking Adventism? So that would be in the Millerite history,
Yes.
1888, and the 144,000 history.
Yes. So we have Millerite history, we have 1888 history, we have the 144,000 history, right? So we have these three distinct histories. And with the papacy, we also have three distinct histories. If someone is able to name them for me. Maybe this one is a bit more difficult.
I'm missing one in the top of my head, but I know it's 1850. And then you have World War II with Pope Pius the 12th, and then that would be the modern one with Pope Francis.
Okay. Thank you for trying. It's actually good. The first history, though, you missed it. Remember? Do you remember now?
It's not 1850, so it's 18.
Do you know a person you can put in that first history?
A pope? I can put a pope.
Yes, which pope?
Is it 6? Oh, you.
You said who?
I can't remember. I think it's Pope Pius the 6th, but I can't remember. Is it?
Okay, so the first history is 1899, if you still remember.
Okay.
1899 to 1845. And then the second history, now you have the John Paul II, 1989. And then the last history is 2001, which is basically the time of the end. In the story of the counterfeit, 2001 is the time of the end, going forward with Benedict, I think, and then eventually Francis, right? So if there's someone who can tell us the history of Protestantism, the three histories.
Okay.
Anyone?
I'll try, but
no, you're not allowed anymore. We'll try someone else. Protestantism. Okay, should I pick? Daniela, do you want to try?
Oh, repeat yourself, sorry.
Okay, so we've been listing the three histories of we have first listed within Adventism, the structure of modern Israel. We've listed the three histories, and then we've done the same with the structure of the counterfeit. So now we want to consider the structure of In God We Trust, if you remember any of the histories at least. A year or a person connected with it.
Maybe 1865.
1865? Yeah, I guess it's within the range. Because it's basically from around 1863 to 1900.
Yes.
The next one?
The next one is for the moral majority time period, 1960s, 70s, no?
Just before that.
Just before that.
Yes. Remember, think of in God we trust.
Oh, in God we trust.
Yeah.
I think it's when they did the thing where it says the other one. There's in God we trust, and then there's the other one that says like about God, a
Under
nation
God.
under God. Is that the one?
Yes, under God.
Under God, yes.
Maybe if you can think of a president then.
Who was that? Daniela. No,
It's
president.
okay if you don't remember. Maybe someone else can tell us.
Yes.
Okay, this is the history of Eisenhower. If you remember Eisenhower, and this is basically the history of the 1940s to 50s, right? And then eventually, after that, we have the history of 1979. I'm sure we now all remember 1979 going forward.
That's the moral majority time period, right?
Yes.
Okay.
Okay, so basically, I wanted us to look at these three structures to identify a pattern, right? And a pattern that we see with these three histories, maybe someone, okay, everyone now is allowed to answer. So what is similar about these three histories in connection with these structures?
The failure, success.
Yes. So the first histories are histories of failure, right? The second histories are also histories of failure. And then the third histories are histories of success, right? So we see with Adventism, the papacy and Protestantism, the last history is the history of success. And this is the history in which basically the Sunday law succeeds. Because in all these three histories, we also see that there was an attempted Sunday law, basically, if I can put it in quotes. And then we see the same thing here. And then in the last history, we see the same thing, right? So now when we consider Protestantism, because that's what we want to focus on. So we just wanted to bring this out, these structures, to identify that, to have that in our minds. So what we want to focus on is Protestantism, right? And we want to consider a pattern with these three histories, right? So if I can just remove that. So like we have already identified, this is what we are going to put on our line. So the first history, like we said, this is basically, we'll just say the 1900s, right? And then the second one is the 40s to 50s. And then this history is 1979 going forward. So what we want to identify, we now want to, as we say, focus in on just Protestantism. And what we are seeing here on our board is a progressive history. But something we can also do is compare and contrast the histories. We can see a repeating pattern, right? And as we identify that repeating pattern, we're basically saying they are similar, right? The histories are similar. We see similar things happening in those times, right? Even though we can also contrast. And this is what we actually want to look at. And remember, we're saying these are the movements for the Sunday law, right? So in order for us to understand this final history, which is the history that we are basically in, that is leading us to a Sunday law. And this Sunday law that we're talking about, we're saying that it's a history of success, So it's actually going to succeed, unlike in these histories, which were histories of failure, right? So because this is the time period that we're living in, we want to make sure that as people who are supposed to make sure that as we identified Adventism with the structure of modern Israel, is also going to be a history of success in our time. And how that succeeds is through us actually doing our work, because we know that the SDA church is going to fail. It's going to be shipwrecked. And they are supposed to be the defender of humankind. But when they fail, then who is going to do that work? And that is Paul or us, right? And so, in order for us to be able to do that work and actually stand on the right side, when the Sunday law test or the great test actually comes in our history, we need to go back into the past histories, look at what happened and how even those people who are standing on the right side failed to do their work, so that we can correct those mistakes and actually do our work in our history. So I'm just going to talk about these three groups, right? I don't know if I can call them groups or histories, and their similar patterns. And we're going to identify those patterns, right? And I'm going to take this from a document that was done by Jared Goldstein. I'm sure we are all familiar with it. I hope we are. And it's called How the Constitution Became Christian. I'll not write it down. So it's How the Constitution Became Christian. We won't be going through a lot of information from there. I just want to take a few points to make a point about what I am presenting today. So something that we can see. Okay, before we go there, so in this history, in the history of the 1900s, this begins basically 1863 going forward. We know that around that time, 1863, this is the time when there is the American Civil War between the North and the South. And we know that when we speak about that, we've also understood that this is a fight over the combination of church and state. So what we have in this history is an attempt to bring church and state together, right? And then we see the same thing here. And then in this history, we are going to also consider that, right? So this is what actually, we also understand that the Sunday law is a bringing together or the combination of church and state, right? So it becomes a point where with the bringing together of church and state, there's people that are oppressed. And basically people do a lot of wrong things to try and do the right thing, because that's what they're thinking they're doing. So in this history, we know that the South is already lost to the fight for church and state. And the Sunday law movements in this history are done in the North, and this is supposed to be the good side. So these are the people who are actually pushing for the Sunday law. And we have the National Reform Association, right? Eventually, we get into the story where Jones had to stand and defend basically the rights of all the people. And what we see in this history is that we have a small group of people who basically feel threatened. So this is something that we see continually with all the different groups, because in this history, there's a group that is pushing for the combination of church and state. In this history, we have the same thing. In this history, we have the same thing. So here, like we said, this is the history of the Eisenhower. How do you spell that? Eisenhower. Right? And then in this history, this is basically where we are starting it, the Jerry Falwell era. Right? So like we said, there is something that is similar that is identified by Jared Goldstein that happens, a similar pattern. So the first thing that he identifies is that there is something they call a group threat. So there's something that he calls a group threat. And what this is, he says, basically it's each of these movements, right? These three movements arose when members of a religious community that considered itself prototypically American believed that outgroups threatened their power and status. So what we have is this, there's a group of people who are considering themselves as prototypically American, right? And because of that, they feel threatened to their power and status by what he calls outgroups, or people who would definitely not fit into the prototype of being what an American is, right? So this is something that we see continually with each group, right? So we have the group threat, a group of people who feel threatened by a certain group of people, right? And then the second thing that happens after that is that there's what he calls a nationalist framework. So in each of these episodes, members of the movement considered religious identity to be a core national trait and therefore understood threats to their religious status as attacks on America itself. So, like, for example, in this group, in this history, we have a small group of people who are called the Covenanters, right? And this small group of people who are called the Covenanters are the ones who actually call other members of the Protestant religion to basically form the National Reform Association, which is the people who then they basically came to a point where they felt they needed to mobilize and start a political movement, right? Which eventually put people in power so that they can actually put in place laws to defend their Americanism, like they would see it, right? So what they're basically seeing is that as they are feeling threatened, as they're feeling that, okay, so there's a problem here. Like, for example, in this history, these Covenanters or these white people, they see a lot of people coming into America. In the North, they see different groups of people, and they begin to see America starting to look different, right? From what they felt America should look like. They see Catholics, they see Jews, they see religious free thinkers, they see Mormons, they see SDAs. And when they see that, they feel America is moving away from what it's supposed to be. And they're afraid, right? Because of that fear, they begin to mobilize and they feel they need to defend, right? The Americanism, whatever they feel America is, right? So the third thing that they do after they feel that America is being attacked, because that's how they portray it. When they feel that threat, they feel that America is the one is being attacked. So that's how they frame it. So eventually something has to be done. And the third thing that they do, so here we have national framework, nationalist framework. So the third thing that they eventually do is constitutional demands. Because they feel that America is being threatened. They then feel that in order to, okay, let me just read what I wrote here. It says, because each of these movements looked to the Constitution, the ultimate to the Constitution as the ultimate embodiment of national identity, they responded to what they saw as an attack on the nation's religious identity by making demands to amend or interpret the Constitution to entrench their identity, right? So because they feel threatened by these outgroups, they then say America is under threat, right? And then because of that, it has to be made clear within the Constitution that what an American is, or what type of a nation America is. For example, it is a Protestant nation, or a Christian nation, right? So they feel that has to be entrenched within the Constitution because that is the identity of America, right? So this is what we see happening with each of these histories, right? So here they had a different type of threat than you have in this history. Here, like I said, you have groups like the Jews, right? You have the Jews, they were part of the threat. You have the SDAs, they were part of the threat. You have the Mormons, you have the Catholics, all of that. But by the time you get into this history, groups like the SDA Church are no longer a threat, because by this time, the SDA Church is already going off course, right? And because they don't want to be called a cult anymore, they decide to join together with the Protestants. And then in this history, also after what had been happening with the Jews and the Holocaust, the Protestant didn't want to be associated with that. So what do? They see something else as a threat. And in that time, they are considering communism, right? Communism within the US and also outside of the US as a threat in that history. But they do exactly the same thing, right? It's almost like they were reading from the same book, right? Because this is what they feel should be done within America. They feel that there's a threat, communism, and they feel that because of this threat, then America is under threat. So something has to be done within the Constitution, something has to be entrenched in the Constitution. And here they called communism godless communism. So they felt that it should be made clear that America, God is on the side of America. So therefore, the Constitution should reflect that. And here, what they want is an amendment to the Constitution. What they want is an amendment to the Constitution. In this history, they want the same thing, an amendment to the Constitution, right? But when you get into this history now, things begin to look a bit different. So in this history, they have a different approach, but they are still following the same pattern that we see in this history and this history. So in this history, a lot of things have happened. You can imagine after the things that had happened here with the civil rights movement, civil rights, and then you have second wave feminism, and then you have Stonewall, right? And then there's the sexual revolution, pornography, rock music, and they feel it's a threat because America is now beginning to look different from what they actually knew. So they felt they needed to mobilize. This is where you have the Christian right, and they begin to want to fight this, but it was going to be, they were not going to approach it exactly the same way as it was here with the amendment of the Constitution. In this history, what do they do? Maybe if I can ask someone, what do they begin to do in connection with the Constitution as well? Someone? What was their constitutional demand, or what is their constitutional demand? Because this is an ongoing history. Anyone? Okay, maybe it's a hard question. Justina? Oh, okay, someone. Okay, there's someone.
Sorry, Charity. The fear of communism, they want to put in the works making the US a Christian nation in general.
Yes.
I'm not sure if that was the answer to your question, because I didn't quite hear the first part of it, but sorry.
Okay, so my question has to do with this history, the final history. We identified this pattern that we see in each of these histories, where basically all the groups that feel threatened in these histories, they feel threatened by out groups or certain things that will be happening within the United States, and they feel a threat, right? And because of that, they feel they have to have a nationalistic framework because they feel threatened as the prototype of America. They then feel that America is the one that is under threat because they are the prototype. So America is the one that is under threat. So because of that, the Constitution has to reflect what their identity as a prototypical American. So in this history, in the history of the 1900s, they want the amendment of the Constitution. This is where they are basically calling for a Sunday law, right? With the bill, is that the Bill Blair? The Blair bill, sorry, the Blair bill. And then in this history, you have also an amendment that they are calling for the Constitution, where they're basically wanting the Pledge of Allegiance and the motto to reflect that identity that they have, right? And in this history, I am asking, what is their constitutional demand? How do they do their constitutional demand? I don't know if now it makes sense.
Yes, forgive me, I was back in the middle era. Go ahead.
Okay.
Which part of that history would you be referring to? Because the 80s are quite different than present time. In the 80s, Jerry Falwell and the religious right were trying to push into the executive branch of government with Ronald Reagan to persuade change, I guess, for them. But as far as the Constitution, I'm not sure how what their demand was towards it.
Okay. So, okay, I understand what you're saying, but I believe that this actually began early on. There's a strategy that was put in place by the, I think it's the Republicans, in connection to how they were looking at the Constitution and how they wanted their identity to be entrenched within the United States. And it involved the Constitution.
I don't know. I was thinking, like, during this time, they have made some strides, and they are ready to implement the next move. And their concern is that God has been taken out of schools and secularism is on the rise. So it's a time where they, with Jerry Falwell, they're forming this coalition, or they're all coming together as Christians to say, okay, we're going to take every facet of government, starting from the lowest to the highest, and to put people in place so that we can be able to control or like we can be able to have a say in what we want through parliament, through like changing laws or something like that. I don't know if I'm right, but that's what I think. So I don't know if you're saying constitution, maybe I'm missing something.
Okay, thank you. So basically what we see in this history and the strategy that has been put in place by the Republicans, and this is something that they've been doing for a long time now. And their issue now is no longer the issue of amending the Constitution like has been done in these histories. What they have to do, or what they have been doing for a long time now, is the issue of interpreting the Constitution. They've taken a different strategy, right? They're no longer wanting to amend the Constitution, but what they are now doing is to rather interpret the Constitution in the way that they see it. And this is basically what we've been seeing in our history. And if I were to okay, I'll not mention that example because I think it will take us off course. But basically, this is what we see in this history. This is what they have been focusing on, right? So from early on, as they were putting in place judges like Clarence Thomas in the Supreme Court, it was for the same reason, right? Where they had now been taking a different strategy. They didn't want the Constitution to be against them. Because in this history, they basically felt that, okay, the Constitution doesn't reflect God. It's a pagan thing, right? And it has to reflect God in it. And then in this history, they are pretty much feeling that, okay, there's a few things that need to be added to the Constitution. But by the time we get to this history, they're a bit more clever, right? And they're saying, okay, we actually love the Constitution because the Constitution is basically the highest esteemed document within the US. So they feel we have to make sure that the Constitution is on our side. And this is something that we have seen not just with the Republicans, but since we are talking about the Sunday Law movement, we are focusing in on the Republicans, but we have other different groups within the US who have also been feeling that the Constitution, whether it's libertarians, they feel it's a libertarian Constitution. Whether it's nativists, they see the Constitution as a nativist type of Constitution. Whether it's a white supremacist, whoever in the US actually looks at the Constitution, everyone knows that it's a very much respected document, and they need to make sure that the Constitution reflects their ideas. And this is what this group of people also have been doing in this history. Early on, I understand it looks a little bit different from the way it is now, but it's basically the same thing. I hope we are together on that.
Just a question. So
Yeah.
with regards to interpreting the Constitution, so what you're saying is that since 1979 to the Sunday Law, that the goal is to ensure that the practicality of the Constitution in our everyday life, that it's okay, the way the Constitution has been understood, like now, say with the evangelicals that or the group that over the years they amended the Constitution to say that America is a Christian nation. So now they're following through to interpret it and to bring it to the fabrics of society, that we are a nation that is, say, abortion, that we do not believe in killing fetuses and like something like that. So that now it's like to make it mainstream, to force the issue. Like regards to now, like what we're understanding about now, regards to the culture that is shifting. Do you know what I'm saying? I mean, like the interpretation now is it's being brought to our everyday lives. Like this is how they're interpreting the Constitution, and in real life, this is what it should be. This is how things should be. And that is the culture that we are seeing right now.
Yes. So basically what we are seeing, the story, even with that document that we're talking about, how the Constitution became Christian, Goldstein basically identifies how in the US there is a constitutional culture, right? Like I said, it's a very highly esteemed document within the US, and a lot of changes that have happened over the history and a lot of wins that have happened over the history of the US have been done through the Constitution, right? Whether it's the 14th Amendment or people are using the First Amendment or the Second Amendment, all of that has been based upon the Constitution. Whatever case is brought before the the Supreme Court and the decisions and the precedents that are made, it's based upon the Constitution. So what we are identifying is that in this history, what these group of people who are pushing for the Sunday Law are doing is that they are still also highly esteeming the Constitution. And unlike in these histories where these people felt the Constitution needs to add some things, or it needs to make sure that it makes these things clear about our identity, because ultimately it was about their identity, right? And in this history, instead of amending the Constitution, they would rather, or they have rather taken the route of interpreting the Constitution in such a way that it actually reflects their ideas, right? Whether it's them holding on to the First Amendment, whether it's them holding on to the issue maybe of freedom, for example, and all of that, whatever is there within the Constitution, it's read in such a way that it will reflect the ideals of these people who are eventually going to make the Sunday Law come into play, right? So they're not necessarily fighting with the Constitution, but they're using the Constitution as a tool to actually entrench their ideas. So I hope that makes sense.
It makes sense. So what you're saying is that it's working, and that's why it's a success.
Yes.
Okay.
It is working. So instead of taking the approach of saying we want to actually remove certain things or add certain things into the document, like what these groups did in these histories, and they became histories of failure, they have taken a more, I can say, smarter way of doing things, because it's a bit more difficult. It's almost like bringing perspectives into play, whether, like, for example, interpreting the Constitution as a liberal constitution, you can use the same clause within the Constitution, but someone else would look at it and see it a conservative view or perspective, and someone else would see a liberal perspective. And this is what we are seeing in this history. So I just wanted to ask, I don't know if there's anyone else who wants to say something on that. I think my time is running out. Katia, just to confirm, what time am I supposed to end?
You still have a little bit of time. Let me see. 12:30. Oh, wow. Yeah. 7 minutes. But we're starting a
Okay.
little bit later, so it's good. You know, you can expect.
Okay. So someone says in the chat, but the success is bad or good. So it depends on the story. If we are talking about the story of Protestantism, the success is basically bad. So, so what I wanted to identify is what is happening with these groups of people. First of all, you have a group of people that's seeing themselves as prototypically American. They feel they are the proper Americans. So anyone else who is not like them is not a proper American. We see the same thing in each of these histories, right? And then when they see other groups that are not prototypically American making headway or standing in the court as judges, and some being in the legislative branch, making basically taking part in deciding the future for America, they feel it's a threat, because they feel those people don't understand what America is and what it's supposed to be like. So they cannot trust those people to make decisions about the future of America. So what do? They then, like I said, they see themselves as prototypically American. and they see the threat on them as people as a threat on the nation. So it becomes a nationalistic framework. And then they have to make sure that they have to entrench their ideas within the constitution so that it reflects and it basically forces everyone to be what this small group of people want it to be. So when we get into this history, we also spoke about how the Sunday law is a combination of church and state, right? We see in this history, combination of church and state, in this history, combination of church and state. And in this history, we know that this begins 1979, and we are still through that history. And we see that as time goes on, there is, it begins to morph, right? Or to basically change form, right? Because at the time where we are, maybe if we can mark 2014. 2014 is basically the Sunday law for the first group, right? And this becomes a harbinger of what is going to come, which is the Sunday law of Daniel 11:41 here, right? So as this is a harbinger, it also has, if I can say, DNA in it of what the Sunday law is actually going to look like. And what we also see in this history is that we are no longer seeing a majority group of Christians who are actually pushing for these things, right? Things have changed. It's no longer mainly the Christian groups, if I can say, if that makes sense. So by the time you get to 2014, for example, if we can mark something that happens in that history, when we look at Gamergate, right? And we know that what happens here is basically something that is big, right? And it leads, it's sort of like a push that is happening within by a certain group of people, right? Who basically feel that they are entitled to, I don't know, the space around them, right? This is a group of men basically in the gaming industry, right? Where they feel comfortable online and they feel they can be themselves, whatever that means in that space. And when they see what they are doing is now being challenged by a group of feminists, right? They feel a threat, or they feel they are being threatened. They feel something is being taken away from them, because already they feel with the feminist movement and all the wins that have happened with the feminist movement in this history, that they have been forced in a corner, because that's how they felt, right? So when they now see their space being invaded again by feminists, they feel there's a threat. And what do? They feel that they need to fight back. And this is where we see the whole idea of men's rights activists. They begin to basically come out of their closets and they take this fight into the political realm. And then eventually it's one of the stories that is leading us all the way to the Sunday law, right? And something that we see that is also similar with these groups is that this group of people, they feel threatened, right? They basically are afraid that they are losing power, that everything that they had is being taken away from them. So for them, they are not seeing that this is something good, progression, something good that is happening within their country or with the other people, right, to become a better place. But they feel power is being taken away from them. Status is being taken away from them. So they feel the need to fight, right? And when we now begin to consider a group of people like these, this is not like what we are seeing here, a group of religious people who are actually pushing for the Sunday law. Here, it's not a group of religious people, right? And this is where we begin to see that the Sunday law that is coming here where we mark Daniel 11:41, as opposed to what we have been seeing here as church and state. What we begin to see here is basically culture and state, right? So the combination of the cultural ideas that people have or beliefs that they feel they need to be entrenched in the Constitution, that they feel is being threatened. So you have that combination of culture and state. So whatever things that are being used to interpret the Constitution is based on the ideas that these people have. Because the other reason why we consider it this way is because we have different groups, whether it's the men's rights activists or it's the Protestants, right, who believe that human beings are not supposed to be killed, right? But they all come together and they agree on the same thing. And this is where we begin to see that this is more than just about religion, right? If anything, it's about people's cultures, their way of doing things that they've been used to. And this is what we are tracing in our history that is leading us to that Sunday law. So basically, when we look at all of this and we see that these are external events that we're identifying in connection with the United States, we know that the external events that we learn, we don't just learn them for the sake of just wanting to know history, right? These external events become a framework that will help us to understand what we are supposed to do. Because ultimately, what if we are seeing this movement actually coming to a point where they are succeeding, meaning that they are going to bring the Sunday law to fruition, or it's actually going to happen, meaning that people are going to suffer because of that. And one of the reasons why people are actually suffering is because the people who are supposed to defend the minorities are not doing their job. So it remains with who to actually do the work of fighting against these movements or standing against this oppression that's happening. It remains with us as a movement, right? If the SDA Church and the USA are not going to do their work, it remains with us to do that work. So basically, when we are now looking at these external events and we're identifying the problems that are there with the Sunday law movements, their ideas and the cultures that are there connected with these people and their identity that they want entrenched in the Constitution, this becomes a parable that is supposed to help us understand the internal, right? So this is the external, and it's supposed to help us understand the internal. Because ultimately, that's what God is worried about. God is worried about a group of people that he has been raising up, right? For, I'll just say 1989, from 1989. And the reason why this group of people is being raised up is to do a work, because there's a vacuum that has been left by the SDA Church. And there is a work that we need to do, which is the work of defending humankind, right? And we see that 2018, with the advent of the Midnight Cry message, God has actually been trying to tell us that whatever is happening here, when we look at all of these things, the culture and everything that this group of people is pushing for the Sunday law, these ideas and all that, this is what we have, right? Or this is what is in our minds. And for a long time, God has been working with us, but he gets to a point where he tells us that we need to switch sides because we have been conservative. And basically, we're going down together with these institutions as they are going to go down. But God tells us that if you go down with this institution, these institutions, what's going to happen? I'm not going to have a people who are going to stand against this movement. So this is why God had to bring in the Midnight Cry message. But when the midnight cry message comes now, it challenges a lot of the ideas that we have. And there's, just like as we see also with these three different groups, there's a people who also feel threatened, right, within the movement. There's a group of people who also feel that they are losing status and power within the movement. And definitely things started changing and it didn't feel nice for a lot of people. And because of that, the fear that people have, or the fear that a lot of men started having in the movement because of the message of equality that came about, there was a backlash, right? Just like in these histories, you have a group of people that feel threatened, that have fear, and there's a backlash basically, or a fight that begins to happen to fight against, because they feel threatened, right? So we have the same thing that is also happening within the movement. So this basically becomes a warning for us, right? That we have to realize that the ideas that are pushing this group of people, we have it as well. And because we have it, we need to let go of it, because we are also going to experience an overthrowing. Remember, in the story of Daniel 11:41, as we approach the Sunday law, we know that there's a group of people that are going through an overthrowing in this history, right? And unfortunately, there's many people that are entrenched in these ideas. Many of us, like has been mentioned, might not actually see how bad it is or how much entrenched we are in those ideas. And sometimes we end up going with the wrong side, most times actually, and only a few people really stand on the right side. So as we know that we have already reached the waymark of Paniam, and we are just at the verge of the Sunday law, at this point where we are going to have the great test, and we understand that with the great test, you're either going to worship God or you're going to worship the beast, right? And many of us, as we are going through these histories, and we are feeling like a lot of things are being taken away from us, we react, just like what these groups of people did with what they did. So what they ended up doing in our history is interpreting the Constitution to suit their own identity, their own ideas. And this is what we have been seeing as well within the movement. And it's a warning to us as we basically see what's happening in the external, because when you look at a lot of people that are still in the movement, you'll see that a lot of people will claim to accept equality and understand equality. But the problem that is there is that many of the people interpret equality according to their own ideas, which is why someone will see beauty in their culture, or they would see respect in their culture, but will not see the inequalities that are there. And many of us are being overthrown. You don't necessarily need to live to say I'm leaving the movement, but because of how you read, how you understand equality, many of us are being overthrown. And I think we are too close to the Sunday law to take a lot of things for granted. And I believe we should actually take these things as warnings and ask ourselves in our hearts if we are actually not acting out of fear. Ask yourself with each decision that you're making, why am I doing this? What's actually driving me to do this? Is this right? And there's much that we need to ask ourselves before we get to the great test of the Sunday law, because many of us are going to be found worshiping the beast. So I don't know if there's anyone who has a question or something to add, but this marks the end of my presentation.
Charity, just an observation on the external, internal.
Yes.
As you were presenting, I found it kind of interesting, you know, in the 70s, Paul Weyrich
Mhm.
mobilized the evangelicals in a sense, behind the scenes. Obviously, Jerry Falwell became the front man of the moral majority, and the issue was feminism, because they wanted to maintain status quo, traditional family, headship, of male, et cetera, et cetera. And so abortion became the avenue, getting away from racism, because of the civil rights movement. He foresaw that it wasn't really going to be any leverage for power, building a power base. And likewise, as time went on, Gamergate, it's Steve Bannon that recognizes that it's untapped, apolitical, just as back in the 70s and previously, most Christians, including Seventh-day Adventists, were apolitical. They weren't really all that interested in politics and power brokering and et cetera, and elections. But the Gamergate aspect, again, in many ways, an apolitical group. They hadn't been mobilized politically yet. But Steve Bannon saw tapping into that group and building it and moving it, manipulating it towards becoming politically engaged, ideally voting for Trump, et cetera, et cetera. Atheists, people who, are non-religious. Mm-hmm. And he saw the potential there. And the external reflecting how God has been bringing us with having our eyes open to read Spirit of Prophecy correctly in terms of voting, mm-hmm. and the power of the ballot, and that we are not to remain outside observers of society and what's going on in the world, but we are to engage in it and enter into it and be willing to vote, but being informed, as you were saying, every decision, are we operating from fear? Are we, what position really are we holding to? How do we see equality? Because it is a matter of culture and state, with equality being the driving force. And the feminism carries over to the LGBTQ equality, gender equality generally. But it was just interesting as you were presenting, the stream of time, in a sense, the external and the internal, and how God moving us to a place, recognizing that we have part of our role. Yes, observers, studiers of prophecy and so on, but no, we're involved. We can drive prophecy. We can develop it by every decision we make, and in essence, how we would vote, and all of those other things. But thank you very much, Charity.
Okay. Yeah, just like I said, there's a vacuum that has been left by the SDA Church for a long time. They since went, of course, 1863 and 1989. When we look at the ship of Adramyttium, it basically tells us that they've chosen to abide in death. So if they are not going to be the defenders of humankind, then who, And if we don't actually pick up the arms and actually do that work, there is no one to actually do that work. So the decisions that we're making on how we interpret what we read, even equality, it's not only an issue affecting us as individuals, but it's actually affecting the rest of the world. Whatever person you can think of that is suffering, whether it's Afghanistan, Yemen, or all those women that have been abused by the different people, or whatever is happening in the world, basically there is no one. Because as we've been learning also, the Democrats, they actually don't understand the depth of sexism and how bad it is. And because they've been sleeping and promoting liberal feminism, we've seen that the Republicans have actually made a lot of strides, and they've gotten to a point where they've now done a lot of damage and they can't do anything as well. So it's actually a lot of weight upon our shoulders. It's when you make that decision to actually stand for equality and to change how you think, change yourself, you're not making it for yourself, you're making it for everyone. And if you actually think of it that way, that everyone's salvation depends upon me, then maybe we can actually start not being selfish, because we're too close to the Sunday law to be playing around with sin. So I don't know if okay, I saw some things in the chat. Okay, so if there is no one else to comment, I'll pray. I'll just give a minute for someone. Okay, so maybe if I can ask Jonathan, could you please pray for us to close, if you can?
Sure. Dear Holy God, Lord, we thank you so much for these wonderful presentations that we received today. I pray, Lord, with these reviews that we would be able to remember the things that we had learned previously in the past couple of years and how they connect to the present atmosphere and the present truth that we're receiving in this new year in 2022, and how they all connect. I pray, Lord, that we would take this message seriously, and that we would review these histories ourselves and continue to to understand them in present context, to understand the great sin that we are up against of sexism, and reflect on where it began and how it has to come to an end in order for your kingdom to reign, Lord. And I pray for all the people that we would have opportunity to speak to teach, that we would speak and teach with power, that we would understand what our capabilities are in this movement, and what the expectations are for us, and what our responsibilities are, whether they're in teaching, or whether they are in voting, or whether they are in living pure lives, Lord, that are free of all sin, particularly the sin of sexism. I pray, Lord, that we would not be hesitant, or that we would not fight against this message as we are in a period of many being overthrown. I pray that we would take it very seriously, Lord, and that we would not forget all that you've done for us in the past. I pray that we would not doubt, but that we would have absolute confidence, Lord, in this message. I thank you for the presentations by Charity and Justina, and Lord, I pray that we would hear from them again, and but that we would all go back and review the things that we learned again today on Acts 27 and the histories of the counterfeit and the SDA Church and Protestantism. Thank you so much, Lord, for the Sabbath, and may you bless the rest of this day. And for those who are going into the new week, may you bless their new week. In Jesus' name I pray. Amen.
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 Okay, so I'll take it back to Katya. Thank you.